This is the CreaseCast.
We're here on another issue of the CreaseCast. I am your host, Cody Davidson. This is my co-host, as always, Lachlan Irvine.
Bonjour.
We get to talk about a team that finally got theirs when Saturday they finally killed the streak. They ended the 6 games of losing in pathetic fashion to finally get a win over Jacob Markstrom and the Calgary Flames.
Yes.
Felt good. Feels good. Unfortunately, Monday happened, which is yesterday. Which I
Moral
need to clarify.
victories, baby. That's what it's all about. It's all about finding the light at the end of the very, very dark tunnel. 4-3. They lose in overtime, but they got it to overtime. Like in the dying moments.
We can get into the game a bit, but like, how disappointing was it when they were like, okay, there's still 38 seconds left on the power play, so to start overtime, we're gonna send out Edler, Myers, and Beagle, and you're just like, well, we get 1 point at least, or sorry, not we, because I'm not a part of the team, but they get 1 point at least.
Yeah, I mean,
that was hard to watch because like you saw the 3 skating out, and you're just like.
Well, this is
You
all right,
might
guys.
as well have just like gone to the dressing room and be like, "Oh, well,
pack it in."
lost."
Yeah,
that
pack
was
it in here. We're good. We came. We you know, when we're out on the road, we really want to take. We want to get at least 1 point. You guys were playing at home. You remember, right? Right. Oops. Right. I forgot. All right. That's true.
So moral victory indeed, but at the same time, you just have to like kind of shake your head because I think that was probably the first time of the season where you were like the coaching was suspect for like maybe the first time in like I don't even know how long of Travis Green's tenure, where you're just like, all right, is he serious? How could he like
why
in a
wasn't
4v3
out there? I understand that they were coming in on that they're coming in having to kill a penalty. Mm-hmm. And, you know, Quinn Hughes being the guy in the box who might be the guy that you would want out there, one of the defensemen you'd want out there in that situation. I get more or less why they went with those with a couple defensemen like Edler and Myers. But why wasn't Hoglander out there? Like why wasn't it Beagle with Hoglander and then one of those two defensemen? Because like he blocks, he's a good puck blocker. He seems really responsible defensively, and he might have been able to maybe break away and taken the puck and gotten a short-handed scoring chance versus actually what ended up happening, which is all three of them just rolling over,
just
being
literally
like,
just standing still and being like, well, can't do anything here.
Free samples. It was such a lackluster. It was such a sad way for that game to end after like kind of the high of, oh my god, they actually tied it.
Yeah, it was like a huge like rallying cry, like, oh shit, they tied it late. Like we actually have a game on our hands. We're watching something really cool.
Yeah,
it was just let's roll out the 3 slowest people on our team and just like hope for the best. And it's like in a 4v3 situation, it doesn't really matter how many defenders you have there because you're at a serious disadvantage anyway. So why wouldn't you put the fastest people available on your team on the ice and just hope you can win the draw and then create something while shorthanded? Because it's like it's a negligible difference, and parking 3 pylons to just stand there and wave their sticks is going to give you just as much of a chance of losing as putting your 3 best skaters out there to try and win shorthand.
You could have gone for something a lot more like creative. Like you could have gone with maybe like a Horvat Hoglander, and maybe for the defenseman you go with like Nate Schmidt or something out there instead. Nate Schmidt Schmidt. He had a rough night.
That was hard to watch.
That was very hard to watch.
That was very, very tough to watch.
And it's not, and you know, you could have gone with something a little bit more creative like that, and then you get Hughes stepping out of the box potentially, 40 seconds later after when overtime started, like something along those lines. You could have theoretically had a relatively good attack just come out there with, and maybe give yourself a chance to steal the puck and still make room to like block and get in the way of blocking guys who are defensively responsible.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Especially against Calgary, which has so many young scoring weapons at their disposal,
Yeah.
and
Like,
their lines deep, in forwards like Gaudreau and Monahan and Kachuk. You're not gonna beat them by just having the three sit still crew out
yeah.
there trying to block, and poor Thatcher Demko kind of just having to deal with, okay, well, all three of you are just kind of blocking my view here. Why don't you
Yeah.
guys just leave and I'll deal with this all on my own?
It was hard enough for Demko when it's like Nate Schmidt throws the puck into his skates
Oh,
while they're being like under pressure by a forechecker. And then it's like another thing when the coach also betrays you and is like, oh yeah, Demko, make a huge save here, bud. It's 4v3 and we're not going to give you any tools at your disposal. We're just going to give you a bunch of elderly people to stand in front of you. Like, put Hoglander, Schmidt, and Miller out there. I know Miller, and we can get into this a little bit later, but Miller played like 25 minutes, so he was probably like on tired legs as it was, but he was actually having a good game. He was forechecking really hard. He was like battling like pretty consistently. So it's like, give your team that's battled to get to overtime in the first place, give them the extra advantage instead of basically threw the towel in.
yeah, and Miller can take faceoffs too, so why not? Like,
Yeah,
he can
exactly.
do. If you still want that one forward 2D setup, which again I don't think they should have gone with.
Mm-hmm.
But at least Miller can still take a faceoff too. Those are the kinds of things that I think sometimes coaches, I think, like Travis Green, get a little bit too bogged down in the roles aspects of things.
For sure.
I think a lot of teams really benefit from having coaches who are willing to go out and be like, you know what, this is a weird situation. Let's throw something out here that might not work and see what happens, right?
For sure.
With so many of these cases, coaches are very much like, you do this. Your job is these 2-3
This
things.
is your role, and you don't go out of that boundary, basically.
Right.
Like, in these situations, you might as well throw the rule book out and just like try what you think could work, or try something crazy.
People aren't gonna necessarily, like, some people might criticize you for those kinds of things, but I think people are less likely to criticize your decisions in that sort of case if they see that you're kind of going for something a little bit different. If they can see that you're trying something a little bit more out there and out of the box to see if it works, and it just doesn't work for you, people are more forgiving about that kind of stuff. Whereas last night it was very much just a calamity of people going like, why did you throw those three out there? Why was that your decision? Especially after they battle back into that game. The way it looked like there was going to be a very Canuck loss where they score on themselves.
Yeah, they score on themselves, and you're just like, well, that's one way to lose, or to kill any momentum you had off of your
an incredibly on brand way to lose. Not as on brand as the Leafs loss last night, but still.
No, that was great.
That was great. We'll talk about that at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But the fact that they come back to tie it, and Besser's shot was beautiful. Like, that's a good, like, that was a farther out shot than I would have.
That was impressive. Like, that shot was impressive purely because the Canucks had basically tried in the last 3 games to beat Markstrom at range and could not do it for the life of them. And then on Monday, in 2 of their goals, they're beating him, one off of that crazy tip from Tanner Pearson, but then Besser just straight up from like the point, just like rifling a shot, bar and in. Like, it took them 3 games or so, 180 minutes to basically figure out how to do that. And that's, man, what a snipe, basically.
They had a very clear game plan, which was very much the
tips and deflections. That's all they were going for, basically, all night.
It was, and it's weird because sometimes, again, I am still very much in that stage of my career where I'm still kind of developing my media analyst brain compared to like my fan brain, where you just kind of see the plays and everything.
Turn one off and turn the other on.
Right. Well, it's kind of like you have to find that perfect medium, right?
Yes.
Like, you have to be able to find the ability to make sure that you're watching the game critically and looking for the things away from the puck, as well as just what's happening right directly at that moment. But even still, like, I noticed immediately that they're just taking a lot of shots from outside and getting a deflection in front of the net.
Yeah,
which
that's all they were hoping for.
Which is actually kind of a decent hybrid of the things that I've wanted to see more from the team, which is less shots from far out and more in close, sort of more shots from in the danger zone. That's kind of a good in the middle because they're still getting their shots from far out, but they've got the guy parked in front to deflect and put them in closer and make that sudden quick change. And it was catching Markstrom and I think the Flames off guard a lot. Maybe they do. I would say the one criticism is they went to that well so much that it became a little easier as the game went on to kind of telegraph where that puck was going. And I think and the Flames were able to catch on. So maybe if they spread out a little bit when they're doing it, I think it'll help them. I think that particular play will come more in handy for them as they go.
Yeah, and just like on that note of like for the coaching side of it, like I just wanted to go dip back to this, but playing the safe route, playing safe, like you were saying, like you're not going to get like the accolades if you're rolling out the safe lineup that helps you win, especially when you're winning. Like all last season, how many times did we see Louis Eriksson rolled out with Horvat and Pearson? It was boring. Nothing ever happened, but it shut things down and helped the first line carry the team to victory. And it worked, enough times that they got into the playoff bubble. This year, safe can't really cut it when you're getting blown out in like 70% of your games. So like when the coach, who's like usually pretty bold, like playing Niels Hoglander as much as he has, is pretty bold. Moving Pettersson to center after never having played it before, that's bold. And so then when you see this coach who's like historically like pretty bold with his decision making, plays like the most safe, boring method to victory possible in a game that they've like just barely managed to make competitive, you're just like, "Aw, come on, Travis, you're usually so great." Something, yeah. Come on, like you're poking him, just like, come on, do something.
Do something fun.
Do something fun. Throw Hoglander and like Roussel and like a third forward out there instead of any defenders, and just fucking go nuts. Why not?
Position Lasaki. I want to see it. I want to see them just go with just 5-4 like a power play where it's just all forwards. Well,
like you
have Hughes. Like Hughes is Quinn Hughes basically is a forward to some
especially
degree.
This season with his defensive stats right now. He's basically a forward and one of their best. So
Norris candidate Quinn Hughes. Up to you.
No way. He's going to be a Selke candidate or something.
That's true. You know what?
That was my joke with Patrick Johnson. Like all last season when the awards were getting written, I'd always at him and be like, "Hey man, you got to vote Roman Josi for a Frank Selke vote." And he's like, "I've already put in my ballot, but thanks."
What's to most offensive defenseman? It should it's Selke backwards. It's just like. It's like, I'm not going to even try to attempt what Selke backwards is, but that'd be very funny if it was just like literally like a mirrored version of the same trophy.
Yeah, that'd be rad. But the Canucks had a little bit of help on their hands in this weekend where they managed to earn 3 points out of a possible 4. Famed owner Frank the Tank himself.
Frank the Tank, that's right. That's the Tank. Bieksa, according to Kevin Bieksa.
Did some tweetings. He did some rallying cries.
I think there's supposed to be
for the boys.
I think there's supposed to be a jingle here usually in the Aquilini tweets section, or is that a different show?
That might be another show.
That might be a different show. Well.
But we won't get into the tweets, but it was kind of very funny that like.
Oh, you don't want me to read them all out?
No, because they're so embarrassing, and I hate all of them.
Oh, okay. Let me say something. Okay, maybe we're gonna have a disagreement here, and maybe we're gonna have a bit of a disagreement here. But honestly, okay, we had already talked on the last few shows about how it was trash that as much as Jim Benning is not doing the best job. That it's ridiculous that they're just kind of letting him take it out there.
Yeah.
And just like either get rid of him or stick with your guys sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, I don't like a lot of what Aquilini said, but also he kind of had to. Like, okay, if you're not going to make the move,
very, very late.
It was
kind of done in a shitty way because he blames the media.
That was the worst
and it was
part.
like, really? You're gonna wait till now to come out and be like, I'm backing my boy after 3 weeks of the team sucking ass and me not having his back publicly. I'm gonna do it now and then blame like a media group that just saw like 50% of its members and most vocal members who've just lost their jobs. That's who I'm gonna blame. It was like, really, dude? Are you kidding me? Like, that's why like I don't even want to get into the tweets because like it's just like complete tonally like inconsistent with like how he's basically played the entire season, where like, yeah, the team gets killed 6 games in a row, and then on the precipice of, the news coming out that has been leaked, obviously from within the organization, that the next 4 games are going to be like the litmus test for whether or not they stick with him or not moving forward. It's then all of a sudden he's like, Mr. Jim's my boy, and it's the media's fault that he gets such a bad rap, but his decisions we back, and his direction he's chosen we back. And it's like, where was this? Like at the start of the season, you put out a letter saying playoffs are number one. Playoffs are the goal, and anything less than that isn't going to be good enough. And we now hold ourselves to a higher standard moving forward. Yada yada yada. And then the bar had been lowered so low by like all these like 5-goal blowouts by other teams in your division that suddenly like you had to step in and try and lower the bar a bit further so you could make it seem like you weren't being a complete idiot in your off season by approving all these awful decisions or whatever. Like,
right.
Weird.
Yeah, I thought the whole thing was sketchy for sure, and it was kind of like, I don't love what I'm hearing, but at the same time, when if the owner's coming out and being like, I have full confidence, that kind of already tells me what I need to know, which is, oh, they gone.
It's
like
because he did the exact same thing with Linden too, when he's like, we have all the faith and trust in Jim and Trevor moving forward to this year's draft, and then like 6 months later, it was like, Linden's gone. It's Weisbrod and Benning carrying the show. And it's like, oh.
Yeah. One of my earliest memories of like really thinking I wanted to do like hockey media stuff was, I remember there was this interview, I think this would have been the Tortorella year. This was like late in the Tortorella year. Mike Gillis was on TSN 1040. Doing
his
like
Wednesdays with or whatever it was.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. He was on with like, I forget who he was.
I think it was Harrison Price. He would go on like every week or something, and it was always like really, really interesting radio.
Yeah, I think something like that. And I remember I was listening to it in like the kitchen. My mom was doing something at the time, and I remember, and they were asking him about John Tortorella's future with the team or whatever, or something, and he was like, and he was like, oh, we're gonna reevaluate at the end of the season how things are going, and this was like April, and I was like, oh, he's gone, and my mom was like, what are you talking about? He just said they're gonna reevaluate. That means he's staying. I'm like, but that's management speak for they've already decided he's gone.
They already know they're not getting anything else out of him.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, Gillis himself was gone first. And
he probably knew it at that time too.
Yeah, exactly. I think he gave that answer for a lot of things, and I just remember thinking like, oh, this is kind of cool. I'm like, I've listened to enough of these to know that this is absolutely management speak for, we've already decided this guy is long gone.
It's like when you go to your boss and you're like, hey, I need a raise, and they're like, oh, we'll reevaluate in the new year or when the next budget comes out, and you're like,
that's
never gonna happen.
So that's a no then. Okay.
Yeah, so that's a no. Okay.
Cool. Thanks for your time.
Yeah.
And this is kind of what we're getting here. I mean, it seems pretty clear that this is going to be I mean, it's weird that Travis is in there. I don't love that. I don't love the whole idea of him being thrown into the under the bus here too.
Yeah, it's a bit
Because
odd.
again, I think he's doing the. I mean,
It was
contrary
exactly
to
like
that
last
of
year.
your overtime, where he's doing as best he can with the roster he has.
Yeah.
I think. I don't think he's any other coach is coming in here and adding like adding 5 other wins to this total or something.
No, it's basically exactly like last year. Like he's getting the most out of what he's been given. And last year he managed to get like some elite performances out of Miller, Vertanen, Adam Gaudette. Like he's getting
Pearson,
like
yeah.
like his line matching and his sheltering. It worked out in such a way that he basically got like a near playoff caliber team out of honestly like not that great of a roster. And now this year, you take out some of those elite pieces, and not elite in the sense like on a National Hockey League scale, but for what they were. So Tanev's like value to this team, Markstrom's value to this team. Like, granted, now we see how he's playing on the Flames, probably a National Hockey League elite Vezina caliber goaltender.
Oh man,
But
that's
but what
really come back
Travis
to
has
haunt them.
got. Oh man, we can get into that, but like what Travis is getting out of his lineup right now, like obviously it's enough to skate by, but the pieces that are there or left over, like obviously aren't going to be enough. And all the management decisions, the roster decisions that they went into in the preseason, like clearly they hitched their ride to some of the wrong ponies. And Travis can do everything he can. He can line match. He can shelter all he wants. But at the end of the day, he can't do that for a D core that is as slow as it is, or a forward group that is now 1 year older and outside of one new addition is pretty much the same old crap.
Yeah,
And I don't mean that for Pedersen or whatever for the people listening to this, but obviously I mean that for the bad players on the team. But but anyway, speaking of the elite players of the team, why don't we pick our Infinity Gauntlet reward for the 2 players from, I guess, the last 2 games or whatever since we last recorded, which was Thursday. So I guess the Saturday victory and the Monday overtime victory. I'm going to assume your pick isn't Nate Schmidt, so I'll let you go first.
I don't even remember who I picked last time. Who did I pick last time? Was it Demko? Did I pick Demko last time?
I feel like you and I were kind of on the same page where Demko was an honorable mention because he was doing the best he could with the lineup on his like in front of him. But it was like Hughes. I think I picked Hughes for how many minutes he was churning out and the fact that he was still producing even though his defensive
and then I think you know what, I think I did pick Demko and then left Hoglander off the board.
Yeah.
Or Pearson. It might have been Tanner Pearson. I think I picked it recently as well.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I'm pretty much torn right back to Demko again. I mean, he's so good. He's been great in the last 2 games. He held them in that game yesterday during that onslaught in the second period. Like this, we talk about the second periods being the worst part of the game for the Canucks. Yesterday was an absolute, just a huge example of that. Like if you guys go to Natural Stat Trick on your internet browser, I was trying to think of like an app
on computers now.
Yeah, I know. Isn't that weird? Yeah. I heard it's coming to phones eventually. Huge if true. Basically, they have this very handy thing if you're a pleb like me who doesn't understand anything about Corsi.
They call them pleb stats, I believe.
Which is mostly puck possession, I believe, like in shot tracking, essentially. Yeah. You can see the game flow. They have like a game flow chart where basically it shows who had the most like control during this time and like the percentages and everything. During the first period, the Canucks have it at about middle, like it's still kind of hovering near the middle where it's very even, but the Canucks have the advantage. Second period, just craters.
Yeah.
It just craters into the earth for the entirety of the second period before it finally kind of comes back up in their swings back up around their favor through the third period and overtime. So
I think it was Patrick Johnson who had a tweet about that where he's like, it's a bad sign when your shock or your control map looks like a toilet
yeah,
because that's
yeah.
what it looked like. It's just like whoop. It is
Yep.
pretty bad.
Yep. Exactly. It looks exactly like that. This team is cursed in the second period, and they should absolutely start putting forward a motion with the NHL to just cut the game into two 30-minute halves, because that way it
Yeah.
gets out the middle frame. So that way you're curse lifted.
Cut out the worst part, and then you should be all right.
Exactly.
Kind of like last year when like the first period was always like a huge disaster for them.
5 minutes.
Or like the year before that, it was like the third period. You just knew it was over because they were going in with like a tie or a like down one. It was just going to get worse only.
Yeah, exactly. Unless Jacob Markstrom pulled something magic out of his hat.
Yes, which was a big ask.
Which is a big ask, but one he was usually
well.
quite willing to do. And Demko, for his part, did quite well. I think he matched up very well against Demko in the last couple games. The game yesterday, I think people were giving him a bit of a hard time. Specifically before the Schmidt goal, people were kind of like, I think there was a little bit of unfair criticism heading Demko's way, even though there wasn't much he could do on any of those shots. And again, the Flames cooked the Canucks in possession during that second period and parts of the third. He faced 27 shots. The save percentage won't show it, but he looked quite good, and he came up with a very clutch save on Johnny Gaudreau late in the third period yesterday that really held them in it and made the best goal possible. And what about you, Cody?
My choice would be for Barack Boeser.
Great pick.
Yeah, he was like unreal. He was like legit, like on the offensive. He was forechecking like crazy. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of stories probably like when COVID is over and like the athletic guys like Harmon and Drance and like Boulis, like all those guys like are able to like actually go back in the locker room and get like one-on-one time with these guys. I think there's going to be a lot that comes out about Besser's season he's having right now, because he's second in the league in goals scored. And it isn't just like, oh, he's getting favorable power play time. Like at 5v5, like he is like a monster. He's basically everything that JT Miller was last year for that top line, but now it's him, where he is just carrying in terms of possession, passing, setup, goals, like minutes. Like the guy is like having an unreal season. And last night he was just like all over the ice and all over the puck and was like literally the difference maker and at least earning a single point for that team. Like without that shot from the point, they are coming away from a 4-game series or 3 of 4 with 2 points out of a possible 6. At least 3 sounds a bit better. 3 of 6, 50%, but 2 out of 6. That's when I don't know if Frankie's putting out any more tweets saying he's backing his boy if they're only getting 1 game out of 4.
Yeah. Besser looked great.
He was unreal.
Besser looked great. And yeah, you're saying he's kind of looking like he's looking a little bit like JT Miller on that line, which is good, which is huge for the Canucks because
yes.
I mean, we've already talked, I mean, Miller's had a bit of a weird year for sure, but down the line, especially when it comes to next year, when you start looking into next year, there's already been the talk of, well, you're in this cap trouble right now.
Yeah.
You need to maybe move some money out. Do you start looking at, you're going to probably need to give some assets up to get rid of players that you, get rid of contracts off your books.
Yeah.
And again, I really like JT Miller, and I think he's better than this season has been, for sure. And I think he is definitely closer to the player he was last year. But theoretically, you can now look at him and you could now look at the idea down the line if this keeps going the way it does for Brock and going and say, well, we've got this guy kind of carrying the play for our first line now. What if we move Miller later down, not this year, obviously next year, or even maybe like into the trade deadline next year? What if we move him with one of our bad contracts to clear out a bunch of cap room so we can make something happen. So we can make something happen with our younger guy. We can save some money on our younger guys or sign UFAs.
Well,
It's not. That's obviously a bit of a nuclear option thing, and that's thinking a lot farther down the road than we need to be right now. But that is something to keep an eye on. That idea of can your younger guys, the guys who you've already made your core and believe to be the guys who are going to lead you to a Stanley Cup at some point, are they able to make some of your other older veterans more expendable down the line, and maybe you take risks on moves that you might have not been able to in the past just because you couldn't afford to get rid of them or to let them go.
Yeah, because that's always been a problem with this management group is like when they have an asset at its prime, they don't jump on the option of trading them when they probably should be in that window of trading. I think Patterson has put out a. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I feel like recently a name has come up in that department.
Yes, we can we'll get into him a bit.
Yeah.
Later, but when it comes to like knowing where they are at their window and when they should move on from someone before it's too late, this team has just fallen on their face time and time again for 7 straight years. And like you could argue like, oh, they moved on Burrows too late, but they eventually moved on him and they got something that's kind of turned into barely anything. Like, okay, great. Yannick Hansen, they moved him out to San Jose at like the perfect time. They got Goldobin, who was like basically like a guy for a little bit.
It didn't
amount to anything, but it was like
they
recognized when they could move something out. Exactly. It was an
right.
effort.
And even Jonathan Dahlin, I think, was a very good effort when they got Alex Burrows. Like I liked that flyer, and it just and they gave up on him.
Out too if they just
they gave up on him. With Goldobin, they waited long enough. Like they gave him the time, and it just didn't work.
They gave him all the chances. They gave up
way too early. They gave it way too early. I don't even know what the deal is with Linus Karlsson, who they got back in that deal. He's definitely still in their system.
I doubt he's much of anything, but when it comes to Miller, you look at this team and you're like, okay, if like according to Jeff Patterson, they have to win something like they have to have a winning percentage of like 667 or something like that for the rest of the year in order to maybe crack 62 points and be a playoff contender, assuming 62 points is like the bare minimum for the 4th place team. Yeah. So that's a big ask for a team that just now broke a 6-game losing streak and hasn't strung together any semblance of like victories outside of like crushing Ottawa. Yeah. So if you're the Canucks, the deadline's coming up soon and you're like, okay, even with Miller in this lineup, I don't think we're making the playoffs this year. Do we trade him because he doesn't have a no trade clause? He's like an incredibly like good asset that you could flip at the deadline and just like completely clean up if a team wants to take him on. It would be tough. It would be a tough sell for this market that would basically grill you over the coals for the fact that you gave up a first and like a bunch of assets that don't really matter anyway in the grand scheme of things. It was basically just like a parlance for Tampa Bay to get Blake Coleman and then, win a cup. It would be a bad look optically, but in hindsight, it would be, well, at least they moved on while they still could, rather than hold on to him and say like he regresses further next year when they haven't made the playoffs, right? Like you're taking a huge risk that you're basically gambling on him having a bounce back to a year where by all accounts he was playing way above expectation and was due for a regression to a season like right now. And I don't know if I trust this management group in its current iteration to make that kind of judgment call on a player because they've historically failed at being able to identify those kinds of assets, one of whom we can get into very shortly.
I will say on JT Miller, he is on an extremely friendly deal. He's 5.25 million. He's got 2 more years after this. I will say that, like, yeah, I say you could maybe make him expendable as a cap dump with like a Myers or an Erickson if you can swing it. But if you're giving him up now, like at the deadline sort of thing, I want something back. You better be getting something, like something good back. You can't trade him. You can't be trading him. I don't think you can trade him at the deadline this year as a cap dump like that with nothing and get nothing serious in return.
Yeah,
You
you have to be getting like a premier top 6 young winger in return, preferably on the left side, or you basically just call the year a wash and you don't give a shit who you put in your top 6, and you basically wait until Vasily Podkolzin comes in and maybe he gets in a game or two at the very end of the season, and you roll the dice basically. But otherwise,
call the Sabres up, be like, yo, give us Taylor Hall.
Oh man,
that'd be interesting. Actually, that'd be kind of an interesting thing.
They're like a bottom feeder, so they're probably in the same boat of like, well,
they actually did that Hall contract. I'll say for the Sabres was a smart call. Like that was a good idea to just be like 1 year and a year that could be a throwaway. If it works, we make the playoffs. If it doesn't, we can get some prime assets for him. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah.
I will say though, in the Canucks management's defense, a little bit, lots of teams are like that where they just refuse to give up on these guys that they've had for a long time and don't sell right away. Like that's an NHL problem.
I was gonna say like. It's basically like there's Tampa Bay, who has shown a complete willingness to jump or to say goodbye to guys who still have like tons of like current value, if it means getting something that will have like a bit of a longer term value for them, like Drouin for Sergachev, all their deals with the Rangers, who I would also say have shown a complete willingness to bail on guys when they think they can get something that rewards them later down the road. Most other teams, not so much. So it's it's basically like it's the all too often mentioned hockey deal where everyone's basically just trying to trade and swap around the exact same kind of asset and hope they work out at their new destination for both teams. It's way too friendly. I
do think there is an aspect. Well, actually, I mean, I would say too many teams try to like just fleece each other. Like, I think there is kind of an issue of teams try so hard to fleece each other sometimes that they end up just with these loser deal. They end up just making these completely loser deals that makes no one want to trade and never want to make any sort of interesting moves. And I remember like being in San Jose, especially, was a real eye opener of like, that team, like they stick by their guys forever. Like they are very much set in this is our group. We are going to run them into the ground for 20 years. Yeah. They will be here the entire time. I mean, if they had the cap room, Joe Pavelski would still be a Shark right now. And then I look at, I'm not a big sports fan outside of hockey, but I found watching the Toronto Raptors in particular, like getting into the NBA when they won that championship a couple years ago, I got really into that group. And that whole thing of they trade DeMar DeRozan, who was one of the few guys who had ever signed like a proper long-term deal with the Raptors as a star player and said, I want to stay in Toronto. They trade him for 1 year of Kawhi Leonard. Because they believed it would win them a championship.
Like, it was the all-in move of all-in moves. It worked immediately.
Great. And as a guy who watches only hockey, I was like, this is the wildest thing I've ever seen. Like, I can't imagine seeing an NHL team do something that gutsy. And it worked for them. It totally paid off for them. And now it doesn't always. Lots of teams, and the NBA is full of teams that do those kinds of moves, and it completely backfires on them. But I really respect that level of, we're willing to try something completely crazy. Two teams willing to just go and do something completely nuts because they think they think it could pay off either in the long term or the short term, depending on who your partners are, your trade partners are. I love that, and I wish teams in the NHL would get more creative about the way they get those kinds of deals done.
You would hope so, but it never seems to work that way.
Especially because one name is on the market right now.
Yes, so why don't we get into that one name? Or, well, like, there's more, but we can get into
There's
one.
more. The big one is Jake Virtanen.
Yes. Very
So,
interestingly.
yeah, very interestingly, I think it was Darren Dreger today who said that Virtanen is, lots of teams are looking at Virtanen. The big thing that a lot of teams are, oh yeah, you have the tweet right here. Nice, thank you. The Canucks want a young forward in return, which makes sense. The big thing though is teams are paying close attention to his time on ice. And if we go and look at his time on ice in the last game, he played a Canuck low 652.
Yeah, like,
Oh boy.
you couldn't.
Travis Green is a lot of things. He is not a great salesman.
No, but like, it shouldn't be his job to sell an asset that, like, rightly, like, the team should have never been hitching their wagon to.
Sure.
Like,
Sure, I get that. Yeah.
I think I've talked about this ad nauseum on this podcast in particular, that
Yeah.
the team basically said or saw what, like, the hoops that Travis Green had to go through to eke out a near 20 goal performance out of Virtanen, which was, and the big thing that people forget, he was in a contract year where he had arbitration rights. So, big surprise, he puts up one of his best offensive seasons of all time in a contract year when he's looking at a raise. It took Green, like, with like the coaching performance of a lifetime to get what he got out of him. And sure enough, we are 17 games into this current season, and he's complete garbage when he's in the lineup. Doesn't hit. I'm sick of hearing people say, "Oh, look at that Jake hit." Usually it's an accidental hit.
Or he hits the ref.
He dummied the ref the other night, and I think that was like the biggest hit he's laid in freaking 2 seasons.
Yeah, and then there was that first goal of the game, which I think you clipped, where he just was kind of standing there.
He just stands
and
there.
Had his back turned to the play when the puck was actually in the net. By the time the puck was in the net, he was still like completely facing another direction, which is so bad.
And then the Toronto game, he straight up carries the puck through the crease in like this baffling move that no like pro hockey player should be doing, and it results in that first goal in the span of 12 seconds that undid the entire good game. I'm using air quotes here, describe the good game they were having against Toronto that just wasn't working right, and then it was undone by basically Virtanen throwing it away with a dumb move. And then Monday, in a game where the Canucks are finally actually putting together a really good game, things are going well for them, and then on that one goal, he has the option to chase the puck, play the body, and then try and clear it out of the defensive zone. Instead, he ignores the puck, he ignores the body, he charges to like the wall, hoping it's just going to hop by an NHL or forward who's forechecking, and sure enough, the play continues and it's a goal against, because Jake basically opted to not throw a hit and basically just stand there and hope that things kind of solve themselves. And other teams are noticing this stuff. Like, every other team is noticing he only has 6 minutes of ice time and how he's doing nothing with that 6 minutes of ice time. Every other team is seeing him get outplayed by Justin Bailey on a 2-way contract. They're seeing him get outplayed by Zach McEwen on a 2-way contract. Like, other NHL teams are smart enough to see, like, wow, I cannot believe the second year of this kid's contract is $3.4 million of salary owed. That's a lot of money for a guy who is a complete non-factor defensively, and in a season where the coach isn't sheltering him or babying him, is producing nothing. Like, that's an albatross of a contract, even at the
only
little dollar value that it is. Like, it is spectacularly bad when you have a contract that, like, in the grand picture of NHL deals is like peanuts when it's 2 years and like a $2.5 million AAV. When that's an albatross because of the player you've signed to it, like, you just have to shake your head and go, what the hell were these guys thinking was going to happen?
Yeah, it's
bad.
And it's especially bad when you factor in the fact that they very easily could have not qualified him in free agency. They could have very easily not qualified him, gone and got some of their some other contracts done. Forget even the returning guys, like just any other players they wanted on the market, possibly, and then come back. Because did you actually think you were going to lose him to another team? Like,
yeah, and
no.
if you were like,
and if you did,
who
like,
cares?
and if you did, they were probably going to pay him way more than you would have anyway. So who cares? You probably got an upgrade with the other guys you picked up. You very easily could have gone that route and probably still, and if you were still set on really hell-bent on keeping Jake Virtanen, you probably still would have. It doesn't make any sense that you did not need to qualify him. I get that he's your 5th overall guy from 2014,
but get over it
now.
Bro.
Oh my God.
People walk off from their first round picks. Look at Tampa, and they've won a cup because they've walked off on several first round picks. And you know what? It's okay to do that. You don't need to hitch your wagon to these guys who aren't going to provide anything. And it's like, I mean, just coming down to the whole, like, the communication thing and like what the team is trying to go for. You had Benning come out and say his infamous line as we ran out of time. They wanted to prioritize defense. So if the priority was defense, why would you sign this marginal forward to a multi-million-dollar deal, not go after any kind of like defensive help, and then also sign Jace Howerluck, another marginal bottom 6 forward, to like, it's like not a big deal, 800,000 or whatever, but why are you allocating a bunch of cap to guys who are basically interchangeable in the grand scheme of things? If you're prioritizing defense, it's just like, it makes no sense.
I'm all for finding bargain forwards. I'm all for going into the bargain bin, finding as many bargain forwards as you can grab. Right. But Jake Virtanen's not that. $2.5 million is not a bargain. It's not a bargain. That's that's paying more than that's paying over full price. That's paying way more than you should. It doesn't make there was no reason for them to make that signing, and it's looking worse and worse now because he's clearly not prepared for it. Now,
not performing, and what else is new?
Now, if you want to get out of that contract, you're going to have to play him. You're going to have to make him look good. You have to sell. If you want to sell your asset, you have to make them look like a worthy pickup. And
you've got to increase his value somehow, even though he's not playing well. At the very least, like they're saying, they're looking at the time on ice. At the very least, they can get that. They can get him playing minutes, but making it look good is all on him.
Yeah, you have to find way. We talked already about getting creative. You know what? Like, throw him on the PK for a bunch of time. Give him a bunch of time on the penalty kill.
Give him the illusion, or give teams the illusion that he's helping on the penalty kill. Like, who cares?
And maybe he actually does something, and that actually makes him look like maybe like, you never know. You could throw him into a situation. I'm not saying it will happen, but I'm saying
after we just described his defensive blunder on that one goal. But
exactly, I'm saying, like, if you throw him into those really pressured situations of throwing him like on the PK, you never know. You might find a way to magically turn him into something that other teams look at and would go, "Hey, this guy looks like he's doing something. Let's pay more than we should to get him." This is there's so many teams that pull master classes of this where they will absolutely like give a player they need to move on from for whatever reason. They will give them the sweetheart matchups on the ice as much time as they want, completely just boost their point totals like nobody's business, and then sell them at a huge profit, and then the other team goes, "Wait, this guy's not as good. What's going on?" They're like, some teams are just absolutely crazy good at doing that, at pulling that kind of a, I guess, stunt off. But that's what the Canucks kind of need to do here if they want to move Jake Virtanen. The only thing they're going to be able to do to really get what they want out of this, and possibly more, or start any sort of like bidding war over him, is you have to make your asset look shiny and new.
You have to shine him up a bit. It's just like, in reality, if Justin Bailey or Tyler Mott weren't injured, I don't even think he's getting in your lineup to be shined up in the first place. I think this would be, I think I saw a Twitter comment saying, at the very least, his contract is very good on buyouts. And it's like, man, if you've
Looking at that in a
just
2-year
signed a
contract.
guy 2 months ago, 3 months ago, whatever it is, and the one upside is
He's
his buyout
buyoutable.
is okay, you're just like shaking your head like, oh my God, how is this team here?
Yeah.
It's unfreaking believable.
Yeah, it sucks because you also can't they're also in the hard situation where, again, because they only have 2 really legit scoring lines right now.
Yeah.
You can't, the only way you can put Virtanen really in a spot to properly, I guess, succeed or like look or bring up his stock a little bit is to take somebody else who's doing well, to one of your good scorers out, like most likely Tanner Pearson or like a Hoglander or something, and throw them on the third line. So you can put Virtanen with Horvat, with a Horvat, or Pettersson and Besser again, and put Miller on the second with Horvat, with Horvat and Hoglander or something. That
would be just horrendous.
Brutal. It'd be brutal, but that's kind of what that's kind of the situation you're looking at right now, because you don't have many other options if you want to make him look better, unless you want to. Maybe he's your sixth defenseman. Maybe you throw him on the blue line.
Oh my God.
Here's your
that would be helpful if he.
What if he turned into what if he turned into an amazing defenseman? That'd be so funny.
I would be downright shocked.
Norris Trophy candidate
if that ever happened.
Norris Trophy candidate Jake Virtanen is the next Brent Burns.
God, yeah, right. Guy needs to have hockey IQ to be a defenseman. He doesn't have any. I think you and I are like done beating the Virtanen horse. So why don't we get into?
Sorry, Jakey.
I'm not sorry. I can play better. I mean, in our notes for the episode, I did put good on Jake for stealing Aquilini's money. That's really rad, because at the end of the day, that is good. The more money that Aquilini has to waste because his management team that he's entrusted for 7 years are a bunch of idiots that don't know what they're doing. That's really cool. And the more that happens, the better. It just sucks that the on-ice product doesn't reflect said numbers. But we're tired of talking about Virtanen. So we can get into one of our few Twitter questions that segues into one of the major story points that came out from today.
Oh my God.
So
the Canucks got a day off from being the bad news story of the day. They really did.
Yes.
They got saved.
This team basically told the entire league, hold our beers, fellas and ladies. Actually, no, not ladies, because this organization doesn't strike me as the type that appreciates women in their lives. Question from Air Dr. Funk. On a scale of 1 to Johnny Cash's Shaman Coyote, how much do the Arizona Coyotes organization suck?
Give me some inner peace or I'll mop the floor with you. It's great. It's a great episode. The Homer episode where he eats the Guatemalan insanity peppers is a fantastic episode of The Simpsons. If you don't get the reference,
if you don't get the reference, like, check it out, because it's so funny. And Johnny Cash as the Coyote is just like such a weird cameo, and it's wonderful. But yes, for those that don't know or aren't in the know, Katie Strang put out a phenomenal expose on the Arizona Coyotes organization that just pointed out all of their shady financial dealings, their pending lawsuits that they have with multiple businesses that they have contracts with, internal investigations for allegations of sexual harassment, just the general shadiness of the organizational structure, starting with the new ownership, Alex Marullo and his son Alex Marullo Jr. and their new GM, not Doug Armstrong, but Bill Armstrong. It's a wonderful piece on The Athletic. It's
very well done.
If you're in the, I don't know if The Athletic is worth it. Like it's these journalism pieces, like true pieces of journalism, that make it worth every penny you've ever spent, because it is thorough. It is wonderful. And well researched, articled, resourced. Like I think Katie's she interviewed Katie's I don't even know how many people.
Stuff.
She interviewed like people in the management group. It's all anonymous, so like there's no risk of like people getting exposed or anything like that. And it's basically like Bill Armstrong straight up like in his one interview piece with Katie Strang telling her like, how would you feel if someone exposed you, like basically threatening her and harassing her.
I can pull up some quotes here too. I can
it's
throw in a couple things if we want.
absolutely unbelievable how bad it is. And before the morning was even done, like this is before 11:30, the Arizona Coyotes come out with their own rebuttal to Katie Strang's article and expose and basically say, we're going to sue you and the Athletic for this targeted harassment and like this biased journalism and hate speech. You're going after our owner, Alex Marullo, it's like a Donald Trump piece where it then says Alex Marullo has 40 years of business experience and he's a wonderful leader in our community. Like, it is complete garbage.
I swear to God, when I read it, I'm like, this reads like it was written by the previous White House press secretary.
It read
Kayleigh
like
McEnany.
Number 45 or something.
Yeah,
for his dear friend Alex Marullo and his son Alex Marullo.
100%.
It's so embarrassing.
It is so much a puff piece, statement about how about how great the owner is and everything, and about how wonderful he is at his businesses.
Definitely asked his son to write it, and his son wrote it for him.
And it also really, like, I know we gave John Chayka a hard time with everything that happened when he left,
and rightly so.
He kind of actually comes out looking like he does come out with a little bit of I'm not going to say a hero's arc or anything, but he does come out a little bit of vindication, if you will, here. He looks a little bit less suspect here.
So yeah, I'll push back a little bit on that, just because, like, for people that don't know, Chayka basically was a part of the whole draft tampering, where they were examining players well before the draft using techniques that were
that stuff's
legal
still
by the
very
league.
bad.
And then on the precipice of entering the playoff bubble, John Chayka basically did a bunch of shady activities to get himself out of his existing contract with the Arizona Coyotes so he could take a better position within the league for another competing team.
Which he still can't do.
You can't do that. You kind of have to grit your teeth.
But at the same time, the Coyotes put out a press release at that same time that reads that now, once you read this one, seems very much like, oh, this is just their thing where they're extremely...
This is how they deal with business, people and companies.
It being extremely aggressive and overly and purposely mean.
And vindictive and like threatening and harassing. And so like you get it where you're like, okay, maybe Chayka had a few checks bounce. He saw what the owner was like and he was like, fuck this. I can't wait for my contract to be over with this guy. I need to actively get away out of this. I'll take my 1-year suspension or whatever it is, so long as I get away from this toxic work environment. I don't know. We don't know. We just have this brilliant Athletic article that basically alludes to an organization that participated in active misogyny, abuse, harassment, like just all the worst things you don't want to hear about NHL franchise or any franchise or company in the world. And it's basically from the top down. And that's horrible. And like we said, this Donald Trumpian response they had where they threatened Strang for harassment and the Athletic for even publishing it is literally just playing into the piece itself that basically points out how the the Arizona Coyotes, I gotta stop saying that, the Coyotes MO and template from the owners to the GM, Bill Armstrong, is to strong arm people into accepting the deal they want and harassing them until they relent or accept things on their terms.
Right. Which is a very Trump thing.
Which is very Trumpian.
And like lots of a lot of those big companies will do that, where they just take advantage of you in that regard, and they make you feel like the bad person when in actuality they are.
Yeah, they're
Right.
being shady. They're deliberately being shady to get out of paying bills. And
Yeah.
then in their like the piece, they're like glowing about how they managed to cheap out on napkins or something like that. And
Something like that. Yeah.
it's so
Where
embarrassing and such a bad look for this organization that for the longest time, everyone has critiqued how they were helped out by the league itself to keep their finances afloat. And then they finally get this ownership group where you're like, maybe there's hope. And it turns out it's an even bigger disaster than the previous iterations. Like
yeah.
it's
Oof.
ugly. And
Yeah.
I feel bad
Oh,
for Katie Strang because she doesn't deserve this. She
yeah.
literally has in her piece in the first 3 paragraphs where she says, we reached out to the Coyotes and to the ownership group for comments on all of these topics, and they denied
Refused.
every request to participate in this piece. And then to come out the day the article's released and say this was targeted harassment and they weren't included in any of the discussions, it's like you
Okay, we all know
couldn't
you're
be
lying.
more tone deaf or stupid about handling this entire thing.
Yeah.
And
I'm totally gonna believe you, team that decided to draft a racist
yeah,
a racist bully and then claimed you didn't know.
yes,
And claimed you didn't know even though you totally did.
that was one of my takeaways from the piece itself was
Yeah.
that there's all these little hints throughout the entire piece that there's obviously the new GM, Bill Armstrong, who has like an issues with the previous regime and the circle of trust, as I use my air quotes again. I'm going to get carpal tunnel using them this episode. But Bill Armstrong has his circle of trust apparently, and he doesn't trust any of them. So he fires every single one of them.
Yeah, like Steve Sullivan was the interim GM when Shaka left, and now he left earlier this week.
Earlier as well. And that was another thing of the piece was that most people don't leave under good circumstances. They either get fired or their contract expires and there's no option to renew it. But usually all of their deals end up being voided unceremoniously by the owners and said employee. So it's always just a bad look, which is, A-OK sign, just like brilliant. Good job. But the thing that stood out for me was regarding this Mitchell Miller thing and how somehow this team that had its scouting staff label him as a do not draft decided with the new owner or the new GM or whoever it was, they were going to draft him anyway. All right. I believe you have the quote on you right now. So why don't you go ahead and read it?
Sounds good. This is from the article. I'm not going to read the whole article because obviously it's behind a paywall, but you should absolutely go check it out.
Yes. Go read it.
The blame for the Miller debacle would shift daily between the team offices, with senior leadership determined to understand how Miller could have been drafted and others looking to make sure they didn't receive the blame. Armstrong was prohibited from participating in the draft as part of the terms of his agreement once he left St. Louis. This is Bill Armstrong, the new GM. He said he spent the time in a different part of the arena in the coach's room during the draft. Eventually, a mental performance consultant came under scrutiny, a peculiar development, considering she had never been considered a key decision maker. That mental performance consultant was not included in any scouting meetings once the front office personnel changed over, and before that, in a June pre-draft meeting, she shared concerns about Miller's honesty and transparency about that incident and recommended against drafting him, according to several people in that meeting. But some individuals zeroed in on her regardless. Her time in the crosshairs eventually ended. On January 27, the team touted the mental performance consultant skills and expertise as integral to the organization, but some employees were unsettled by how she was treated. Yeah.
Yeah. So, some big fat yikes there. You couple that with the very fact that they're under investigation by like a big giant law firm for allegations of sexual harassment. And obviously there's a bit of a pattern here where women maybe aren't being treated correctly or fairly by the ownership group or the management staff. And you look at the way that their statement is worded about how, Katie Strang is like some hacker monster trying to undermine the existence of this billionaire owner and his organization. this woman is a mental health consultant, had no prior bearing on the draft, who, as far as we are concerned, advised against the drafting of Miller. And everyone in this organization and ownership group chooses to jump on and treat her like shit, like she's the reason why they blew their 4th-round pick, their first pick of the draft. It's shady, and it's incredibly scummy from an organization who, up until that point in the article, is really not doing themselves any favors or making a case that there could be a benefit of the doubt. But you throw this in there and it's like, oh, it's some girl that barely had a say in our draft that we fucked up royally and got embarrassed on the national stage. Let's blame her. It's like, fuck you guys.
Yeah. And then there's the whole Bill Armstrong basically complaining to Katie Strang, not about this article. This was a pastime in relation to when this is another quote I'll just very quickly read. After Armstrong took over as GM, hockey operations employees were warned that unauthorized distribution of any club information will not be permitted and is grounds for disciplinary action up to immediate termination. And then one executive said, I don't know, and apparently they had to all sign an acknowledgement form consenting to that, and one other NHL executive was saying, I don't think I've ever heard of a situation like that happening on any other team. And then in November, agitated that organizational information had been obtained by The Athletic, Armstrong contacted this reporter, Katie Strang, offering a theory that his daily schedule and other files had been stolen from his computer. He warned that the person who he surmised was responsible would be going to jail after delivering a lecture on journalism ethics. Oh, I love this. Armstrong asked this reporter what she thought would happen if he were to tell general managers around the league how she did her job.
Yeah, it's such smug asshole shit. Like,
he mansplained her job to her as a first-time GM.
Yeah.
Also, one of the things that really stuck out to me about the whole these guys really are just loving to massage the truth thing is in the press release they released today, one of the things they mentioned about Armstrong, if I can find it.
Oh, are you talking about what do you like about your new job or whatever? And he's like, I love the owner. He's the most fascinating person I've ever met.
Yeah, the president. That was funny, but I was actually
elite bootlicking.
Yes, there was that. That was great. But also, there was the sentence in here where it's in the actual press release where they say Mr. Marullo's made an economic turndown during an economic turndown into hockey operation of the Department of the Coyotes, from hiring a Stanley Cup winning general manager and Bill Armstrong to a full staff of top tier hockey personnel, which is incorrect. That implies a Stanley Cup winning general manager implies that he had been I would argue that he was in charge of the St. Louis Blues when they won the cup, which is not true.
Nope.
That's a very clear one of those, we're trying to massage the truth to make us seem better than we are, because you can't say that. He's not a cup winning general manager. If you want to say he's a GM in Bill Armstrong who has a experience with a Stanley Cup, an executive with Stanley Cup, with a Stanley Cup on his resume, that's true. But you can't say he's a cup-winning general manager when he was not in charge of that team. That's a very clear, no, that's factually not true what you're saying, but you're trying to make it sound better than it is. This is the kind of stuff, and this whole thing, again, I can't think of an NHL team that's done this before, that's pulled this stuff. Like, I mean, Aquilini did say the the media thing, basically gave the media
the fake media thing seems like nothing compared to releasing a PR statement basically like we're gonna sue someone for false allegations, like,
and also not actually like debating the
validity,
any of the not actually arguing against any of the article's validity. They're just literally being, because they know they can't. Yeah. And then there's the whole thing of like, apparently the owner insists on everyone calling him Mr. Marullo and being very formal with him. And whoever wrote this, I don't think it was him, but whoever wrote this clearly maybe was trying to prove that was correct, because they use Mr. Marullo as many times as they can.
Yeah, it's so embarrassing. And like, I'm just thinking of like historically, like there was like, how many times did Gillis go on like radio with 1040 or Team 1040 and like shit talk the guys on air and hash out his issues with them there? or like publicly. It was never like Aquilini like having this weird PR thing like at the GM's discretion to basically say we're gonna sue you for slander and making fun of me. It's just like
No.
most other regimes and ownership groups like usually take it on the chin and are pretty vocal publicly about like their irritation, or they hash it out with like the guys directly. They don't threaten to sue the freaking paper company or Athletic for releasing shit that's easily accessible by just interviewing people.
Yeah.
And realistically, if they had just answered her questions, they may have been able to smooth it out within the piece itself. But instead, because they said they declined to comment, it makes them look even worse and even stupider, which, just
well done.
Bravo, Marullo.
Look.
Maybe stick to pizza. Maybe get your son to go on YouTube and Google like how to run a hockey franchise. Like
that was that whole thing. Yeah, that was
big
really
fan of nepotism here on the CreaseCast channel.
Basically
getting paid probably a 6-figure salary to sit on YouTube to the point where everyone in the organization knows him as a YouTube guy is so funny, so embarrassing. Big fan.
Look, I have to ask this question because I feel like I ask it every single year with this team. Why are the Coyotes still here? Why do they exist? Like I do not understand how this team is still in existence. And I get that this is a different ownership group than before. And that's kind of telling the fact that the employees are complaining now. Like they went through, literally, I said it on Twitter today. They went bankrupt. And this team declared bankruptcy.
Yeah,
in
literally
2000, bankrupt. In 2009, and were owned by the NHL for a bit because they could not find an owner for about 5 years.
Yeah.
And then even after that, they switched ownership groups multiple times over that course. Lots of these employees have been there through most of that from what it sounded like. They've sat through terrible teams, a deck chair, rotating just deck chairs on the Titanic of management and ownership groups. And it took this owner about a year and a half to just break every one of their spirits. It took that short a time. And we're sitting here celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Coyotes. And frankly, they shouldn't be here. They should not be here at this point. I have zero patience for this team for a lot of reasons. This just takes the cake. Why are they still here? Why are they not in Houston or Quebec City by now? I'm tired of this.
Here's my analogy before we transition to our next section. The Arizona Coyotes, and by extension the Phoenix Coyotes, are the league's Jake Virtanen.
Oh, I thought you were going to say they're the league's Alex Galchenyuk.
I guess so, but that would imply them moving around a lot, which hasn't really happened, at least yet.
I mean, ownership groups keep saying, oh, we think we can turn them around, selling them. Oh, we can turn them around, sells them. We can turn it around.
I'm looking at it from like Bettman's perspective, where he's just like dead set that hockey in the desert is going to work no matter what we try. And when they finally think they've like made a progressive change with like a Cuban owner, it turns out to be the biggest disaster rather than just letting them move to a smaller market.
Yeah. Houston's kind of warm. You can go there. That's kind of desert like. You could go to Houston instead.
Yeah. Right.
And you know what? Like I honestly have Arizona like near the top of my places I want to go see a game at some point in the future because I'm damn sure they're going to be gone by the time within the next decade.
Yeah, it's just like one of those things you got to do before it's like 7 things you see before you die.
Before the Coyotes die.
Yeah.
The franchise dies. Like I need one of those Kachina jerseys, preferably that purple one with the desert, which is fantastic and the only good thing the Coyotes have anymore.
The only thing they got going on for
they're going to be
that and Butterpig. What's his name? Lawson Krause's dog.
Oh my god. Yeah. They don't have I'll say this, they don't have an exciting team going for them. That team is boring as hell.
I know.
There are so many
let's not get caught up on the Coyotes because we'll bore our audience.
We'll fall asleep. Yeah.
But speaking of former Coyotes, little trade action we saw in the last couple days.
Yes.
Ryan Dzingel gets traded back to Ottawa from Carolina for Galchenyuk and Cedric Paquette, who they also just acquired. And then Galchenyuk was immediately waived by Carolina and then traded to Toronto, which is, I guess, a trade. It's some action. I don't really know what Toronto gets out of this, but it's something.
He still makes $1 million. Yeah, that's an interesting pick for them. I don't know. I mean, depth. Okay, forward depth. We've already talked about it. Is helpful, and the Leafs are kind of hitting the injury bug right now. So maybe it helps, and you can throw him on waivers later and just see if somebody claims him. You never know, or you just send him down to the taxi squad or the Marlies. Why not? Yeah. There is this whole thing with Galch. Like I've seen a lot of people in the especially recently talk about how what a bust, and it just shows you that draft can get you anywhere. But the thing is, he had 51 points for the Canadiens in his last year. He wasn't a slouch. He wasn't a complete non-factor. It's so weird. And even in even in Arizona, he had 41 points.
Yeah, he was fine.
It's so weird how this guy has gone to just being shuffled around through so many teams, and people kind of labeling him as this complete bust and whatever, when in actuality, for a good amount of time, he was an incredibly helpful player. I don't see I see why teams would maybe be willing to take the flyer and see what happens, more or less, right?
I think even at the end of the day too, if you look at that 2012 draft or I think 2012 draft,
ooh, that's interesting.
He's still the number one points guy from that year.
Really?
I'm pretty sure he is.
It's not Nail Yakupov, I can tell you that. He is second. He's second. Holy.
Yeah.
Philip Forsberg is number one.
Yeah. So it's
holy.
People say he's a huge bust and whatever. And it's if you really look at that draft, the first round was horrendous, genuinely horrendous when it comes to churning out quality talent out of the top 10.
I mean, Yakupov went first overall. That was a pretty prime example. I think even number two, I think the consensus number two of that draft was Ryan Murray, who went to the Jackets. It was not a good year outside of a few guys like Forsberg, like Tomas Hertl, Teuvo Teravainen. It took him a while to get going. Morgan Rielly, Tanner Pearson, also up there.
Yeah, but specifically out of the top 10, which is where most people are he's a bust or whatever from where he was taken. It's but if you look at that entire draft, some of the best players were taken outside of the top 20.
Yeah.
Lots of the goaltenders, you had Anderson, Hellebuck,
Vasilevsky at 19.
I think Vasilevsky was 19. Yeah. So I mean, relatively speaking, he looks like a bust compared to some of those guys, but he still has some of the most games played and the most points. So it's
this was the Brendan Gaunce draft for the Canucks for a little bit of time.
So you can't really fault him too much. He was fine, relative to most of the players picked in the 2012 draft in general, but as a top 3 pick, you'd want more. But he did have that 130 goal season.
Yeah.
I mean, he had that 130 goal year. That was pretty good.
Now, right? Have you seen Galch's? Have you looked at Galch's points? You're looking at Galch's points, aren't you? You have his list up here.
Yeah.
Dang. Okay, I was gonna have a game ready to go for you, but we'll do that another time. I had a game planned. It was called "Where in the World is Alex Galchenyuk?" and you were gonna have to. And you're going to have to figure out which teams he played for. I might actually retool this for another day.
You should,
for a different
because
player.
I would have completely forgot he was on the Minnesota Wild. I would have completely forgot.
I didn't have, and frankly, I didn't have enough time to put it together exactly how I wanted, but I'll say this, for maybe next episode or next week.
So for CreaseCast fans, you can get, we'll put out a thing.
Maybe that's
we'll
a
hey,
episode, yeah.
CreaseCast fans, send in all your obscure players that have played for a lot of teams, and we'll play who can guess most of them correct, and we'll go from there.
Yes.
But outside of that trade, we only had one other question in the text message inbox at CreaseCast 1040. What do you think the
CreaseCast
chances
1040.
are of Carson Vogt and Will Lockwood turning into NHLers? I don't watch AHL hockey, so I'm gonna let Lockwood know that I'm handling this. No, I'm just kidding.
But you know what? Maybe I will handle this in the sense of this is the comments section of the show, more or less. So let's flip this script around a little bit, and why don't I ask you the tough questions today, Cody? Because you know what? Like this is literally your beat. The comments are doing things. They're finally back and playing.
Comments doing things. The space rocks.
Yeah, and it's such a weird year because they have the fact that it's a mixture of Canucks prospects and Blues prospects. It's the St. Couver Blue Nuts.
St. Couver Blue News. It's they're a weird one, and particular to this person. So Sullivan J. Larson, thank you for submitting your question. We appreciate the support. We appreciate the questions more than anything. For these two players in particular, I've actually been pleasantly surprised with one of them and kind of disappointed in the other one. So
I have my ideas on how this is going to go.
I'm not too sure if you'll be surprised or not, but a lot of my expectations were set in preseason, actually. Will Lockwood had a really good camp to the point of having me, and not just me, but several others convinced that he could be a taxi squad player. Unfortunately, that hasn't really translated to the AHL quite yet. He hasn't scored any points yet. He's, got pretty decent ice time in like the middle six, so not necessarily top line because no one's bumping Berchi, Cole Lind, or Sam Annis off of that top line. So he's a middle six guy, and he's doing all right. His shot attempt control measures are pretty solid for like a kid. Like Cole Lind and Gadjevich in their debut years, their shot control metrics were absolutely horrific. And even last year, they were pretty terrible. Cole Lind was the best. So here's perspective. Cole Lind had the best shot control measures last season, and his Corsi 4 relative was like plus 0.4% or something like that. So that's how bad they were at controlling shot attempts. This year's a bit different. They're actually doing way better in terms of actually controlling shot measures. And Lockwood has a ton of physical attributes that make him like a good player. He's constantly moving his feet. He isn't afraid to battle along the boards or forecheck effectively. The problem is the actual offensive side of the game, where he's required to create passing lanes or create high danger shooting chances or scoring chances. He really hasn't figured that side out. And that kind of makes it disappointing because I thought with the way his preseason went that maybe he could translate that into a very successful rookie debut. It's still early. It's only been 3 games. So maybe, things start picking up once he kind of gets a feel for, his line mates and all that. But for right now, for my money's worth, I don't think he's really impressed enough. It's still early, but we'll see. But Vogt, on the other hand, has been like pretty fun to watch because I had such little expectations of this 5th rounder who was like a 2-year overager. I had no idea what to expect. And for my money's worth, he's been like one of the best parts about watching this season so far because he's got great skates. He's constantly moving his feet. He plays exactly like Will Lockwood, but he's a bit younger, and he's actually found ways to score and produce high danger offense, which I would have expected from the older Will Lockwood, who's, got his years of NCAA experience. But here's Vogt. He's got his first goal, and it was basically from all the attributes that you need to score effectively at the AHL level, which is, being tenacious, being hard on your forecheck, hard on pucks, stealing pucks away. And yeah, I've been thoroughly impressed. Whether either of these two turn into NHLers is, it's way too early to tell. It's always hard to tell with development curves too. Like look at Justin Bailey, like he's 24, 25, and it took him in a one-off game against the Leafs to have people convinced that he was going to outplay Jake Virtanen. You never know, right? It might take that that final year where you hit 25 years old and you get on a two-way deal and you finally kind of figure it out and become useful. Zach McEwen, he was 22 when he entered the AHL for his first year and was okay. And now he's basically got like a litany of fans in the Canucks Twitter who are desperate to see him in the lineup on a night-to-night basis. So fortunately, these two guys are very young. They've still got tons of time and they can still milk them for cheap deals for as long as possible. Will either be NHLers? I don't know. I think Lockwood might if he can string together some offensive side. Vogt is very interesting to me. If he can keep producing at this rate and continue like all the other little things that he does, I would expect him to maybe start getting looks next year or the year following at the end of his ELC. I've been very impressed so far.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is I don't have much connection to the Comets because obviously I haven't been spending time on that beat when I was doing AHL stuff. But I'll say this: when I was doing Giants coverage last year, I actually talked to Carson Vogt and Jet Wu when they came to play the Giants at the Langley Event Center. Actually, the last game I went to before COVID really hit. That was the last game before everything shut down. So I actually interviewed them and chat and talked to them. If I had had the time before, if I had the time before the show to prep, I would have gotten my interview typed up and quoted and everything. Like I would have pulled up the interview file. Yeah. But I talked to him. I saw him play last year. He's tenacious. He's really on top of the puck. He obviously had the overager thing, but he really, from what I remember seeing him play with at the Giants level anyway, at the WHL level with the Hitmen, he had a very physical presence. He had a strong physical presence. He was willing to get in the corners. He really good at setting up and distributing the puck. He had a couple assists on the power play that night with playing with Jet Wu. They were really connecting, which was really funny to see just because there's we know both these guys are going to the same place. He played well, and he end up getting I think thrown out of that game early because of a line brawl sort of thing. Yeah. Him and Wu both got kicked out of the game, so I didn't get a chance to talk to them after. They were both nice guys. Really, Carson was really, from what I remember, Carson really felt like he really had that strong feeling of I could push for something as soon as this season. And that was before the world went nuts. Collapsed. Yeah. So I don't know if you asked him now. I'm sure if I went and tried to get in touch with him now, I'm sure he might have a little bit of a different. He'd have a different point of view. But that confidence of he wasn't going to necessarily make the roster, but the idea that he could push and make it interesting, and he can make it a harder call. That was a guy coming straight out of junior. He had that kind of confidence to him. Yeah. I could very much see him punching above his weight in Utica and finding a way to maybe get a chance to a good look with the team next season, like you predicted. From the Comets standpoint, they're just two. Are they just 2 games into the season right now? Three games
with back-to-back starting tomorrow night.
Okay, I have their schedule just set up where it only has 2 games listed. Because there were 2 games they played 2 against the Americans. They played once against Syracuse. I had 2 questions for you, basically. I had 2 questions for you. Number 1 being, obviously this is a weird season for a litany of reasons, but obviously the Blues and Canucks sharing a team is the biggest one for this particular group. Mm-hmm. As far as the way this team is approaching the season, the way they're approaching the roster and the lineup, how different is the actual approach game to game from this season? Is Trent Cull and his staff's approach to this season differ from last year's?
Well, it's actually, I have to give them kudos because I think a lot of my complaints in seasons prior was that this coach and its coaching staff were way too untrustworthy of their youth, and to the point where you'll see me a lot on Twitter basically being like, the Comets have historically not developed a lot of players. counting, like barring Zach McEwen or, you know, I guess, yeah, Zach's really it. Barring him and
Markstrom.
Chatfield, sorry,
Yeah.
barring Zach McEwen and Jalen Chatfield, who's barely played that many games this season, they've developed one player in their entirety of their existence to become full-time NHLers, and that's Thatcher Demko. Because Jacob Markstrom had several years with Springfield. He had tons of experience with Florida as well. Like, he didn't come in with necessarily into Utica as like this green prospect straight out of junior leagues of Sweden. He was already a pretty refined prospect who just needed some of his edges kind of worked on. So one player, and it's a goalie who obviously, as you know, Lachlan, goalies have very different training methods and development curves than skaters do. So the fact that in 7 years it's been Zach McEwen, who at best is a fringe bottom, bottom six forward, not really good for this management team. And part of that is because I don't feel they've ever put their kids or their youth in positions that the team really needs them to be put into to see what they can do at the NHL level. Zach McEwen barely got penalty killing time in his sophomore debut or sophomore year, and he was pretty bad at it. And fortunately, he was so good at evens at 5v5 that it kind of made it okay that he didn't really have much of a presence on a PK role. And when he did, it wasn't that impressive. And I always said, why aren't you playing Lucas Yashik or Cole Lind or Jonah Gadjevich in penalty killing roles? These are the kinds of roles you need out of your youth so that when they get called up, they can play in these niche roles that you can't always fill with the Jay Beagles or the Brandon Sutters of the world. You need kids on cheap deals doing these kinds of activities so you don't have to overspend in free agency on it. And then this year, it's basically all of the complaints I've ever had have just completely disappeared. Finally, we're seeing a penalty killing shift that is Carson Vogt, Will Lockwood, Tyler Tucker, who is a St. Louis Blues rookie making his AHL debut, and Steven Santini. So out of the 4 penalty killers in your premier shift, you've got 3 brand new rookies debuting in pro years, and a guy who's like 27 and has like a litany of experience. We said litany a few times this podcast. I'm appreciating.
Yes, we have.
So that's what I've always wanted to see, was the youth trusted in these closeout situations, these penalty killing situations, and we've seen it a ton so far. To start the season. It's only 3 games in. I don't think we've ever seen Gadjevich penalty killing, and at this point in his career, I don't think we ever will. I think he's pretty much set in that bottom 6 as a guy who can't really do much or offer much, except outside of a specialist power play 2 role. That's a bummer for him. I wish his skating would come around and we could get more out of him, but it's quite evident that the coach this year is willing to at least try his youth in these situations. And for my money's worth, that is great, because I think players like Will Lockwood, Carson Vogt, Cole Lind, Lucas Yashik, the only way they're going to get a sniff of NHL time is if they can penalty kill effectively or prove they at least have the utility of playing in these niche roles. So from that sense, I have to give props to the coaching staff for actually making adjustments in a year where they're pretty much forced into doing it, but kudos nonetheless, because historically speaking, they were really bad at it.
Right. It takes a lot to, we've already talked about it today, how coaches sometimes get very stuck in their way.
Yes,
and
sir.
It's good but when they adapt, that's when they're at their strongest and are able to properly adapt to the circumstances, and that's kind of the way the AHL has been dealing with this season. I should clarify, I said that they played Rochester twice. That was wrong. They played Rochester, Syracuse, and Binghamton.
I knew what you were saying.
But the listeners might look and think I'm an idiot, so, which is true.
We can't have that happen.
But yeah, it's true. But I just want to make sure that they know I'm just a little bit less of an idiot. But they are playing basically a lot of games against a huge amount of games against Rochester and Syracuse this season, with a handful against Binghamton and Providence,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still in the same in a North Division with as with a couple other teams. Lehigh Valley, Hershey, and Wilkes-Barre Scranton are also in there, but they're not going to play
Technically,
them.
yeah, but they don't ever play them. It's
Yeah,
like
they do.
3 opponents only, and it's pretty much like the same guys just cycling in and out. So there
Right.
it's gonna be kind of like this Calgary series, whereas we've seen it go along with the Canucks. Like it's been pretty intense as things have ramped up and things get closer. I think in their first exhibition game against Syracuse, they had a fight, which is like really funny because it's like it's exhibition in a season that doesn't even have a Calder Cup scheduled for the end of it. So you're just like getting heated,
Oh,
like absolutely nothing. So
so they don't
it's
have
kind of
a.
funny.
They do not have a
They have no
playoffs.
plans for playoffs right now. As it stands, they
Interesting.
don't have anything planned. It's just like
Okay.
the presidents and the owners of like these clubs were basically like, we are fine with at the very least giving some kind of product on AHL TV or their local radio or TV deals so that they can still guarantee fans renewing their season tickets and having the promise of a product at least coming back for next year.
Yeah, and also so the NHL teams get to see their products play some
Yes, they have
competitive
prospects at
hockey.
least with
So
the
I guess
ability to play somewhere.
so that actually changes my last question a little bit, and I guess in a more interesting way here now. But I guess the question now being with if that's the way the season's going to go, there's no playoffs, there is no if this is the regular season is it, and that's everything. What to you constitutes a successful season for this Comets team?
I think if the Comets team can maybe win, I mean, the wins don't really matter, to be honest. Like, if there's no Calder Cup being played for, it's like whatever. It's at least, it's just like the experience that they're playing, a lot of shorthanded time, a lot of shutdown minutes, like in close games, like whatever. Like, not a lot of blowouts, but like, putting these guys in situations where Carson Fogt is out on the ice in the last 30 seconds of a game when it's 2-1 for them and they're trying to prevent an offensive zone or a defensive zone face off from going badly. Like that's what I want to see. I want to see them in these situations where they're really in high danger and situations that a Travis Green would be reluctant to play a kid in, but at least he has a kid available should they call him up. I think I'm pretty sure it was Sheldon Keefe of the Marlies at the time who had a great quote where he spoke with Pierre Engvall and he was said, if Kyle Dubas calls me tomorrow and says he needs a center to play tomorrow night, are you going to say no? And Pierre Engvall said, well, I'm more comfortable on the left wing. And so Sheldon Keefe replied to him and said, so what you're telling me is I should tell Kyle Dubas that I don't have, or Pierre Engvall isn't ready or able to play anything other than center. And Pierre Engvall was like, oh, okay. Because that was like basically the way of just saying you need to show that you have utility to your organization. Even if it's a place that you're not comfortable with, you need to be able to prove to your organization that you can do stuff more than just what your niche is. And this season, if at the end of the year, Will Lockwood and Carson Fogt and Cole Lind are hovering at, 0.7 points per game, great. But if they're also doing that while managing, 5 minutes of power or shorthanded time a night, that's so much better than the points could ever do because it's proving to not only Trent Cull, but to Travis Green and the coaching staffs in the NHL that they've got something more than just like a niche, like Canadian Nikolai Goldobin, but you have Cole Lind, who is everything they wanted in Goldobin, but with all the attributes of a Zach McEwen, who's going to bring a lot more to that bottom six along with utility, which they've really struggled to get in the last 7 years out of their prospects. So that's what I'm hoping for. That's what Canucks fans should hope for. And so far, after 3 games, I think they're on the right track for accomplishing that.
Right, especially because if you get called up in that to play a utility role, even if it's out of your comfort zone, like a spot that's out of your comfort zone, they will, and you play well and you find a permanent spot there. eventually they will likely make room for you to play on the niche part of your game that you're most successful at.
Exactly.
It's just like any other job where sometimes you start at the bottom in working the entry level job because that's what's available. It's the lowest paying. It's not something you ever necessarily want to do for a career, but theoretically it could get you up to the spot that you want to be, in that spot in that business that you want to be doing. You just need to show up every single day, do your absolute best, and make a good impression on the people in charge, and prove that, hey, you can be trained on these things and trusted on these other roles and utilities that you want to be doing. And that is very much the case with what these Comets should be looking at as their way on to getting onto the Canucks going forward.
Absolutely. Well, I think that about sums up tonight's episode. We were happy to shit on the Arizona Coyotes organization and talk about a couple organizations that were kind of doing the right thing. You have the Comets who are doing their best, and you have the Canucks who are trying
victories.
Yeah, the moral victories of one organization and the literal victories of their smaller organization for the first time in 10 years. So with that in mind, don't forget to follow the YouTube channel, guys. Lachlan's putting a ton of effort into editing these videos, editing all the times we accidentally have to stop because I get weird tweets in the middle of recording.
Or I just lose a quote because I'm that fun.
Because we forget to look it up, or we stutter on our words because we didn't prep enough and spent too much time talking about The Simpsons. You know how these things go sometimes. Other than that, you can also rate and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast streaming service, whether that's Podcast or Google, whatever the hell it's called, Podbean. I don't
Google
know.
Play Podcast now. There's Podbean. There's so many.
There's so many, but whatever it is, make sure to review, rate us. We appreciate that more than anything. We love the reviews as well. And if you liked what you heard in tonight's episode and you heard some of the ideas we were pitching for future Patreon content, you can check out our Patreon as well. We have $1 tiers and $5 tiers. Lachlan's always churning out content. It's kind of gross how he finds the time to do this while working a 9 to 5. I don't think he's human. I don't have the time for that personally, but I do find a way somehow for all these podcasts, and I love it. We love talking to you guys. We love talking hockey. We love talking Comets. And for whatever reason, we love talking Arizona Coyotes and Jake Virtanen. So, we're not well in the head. So those $1 and $5 you guys are putting towards us, those go towards, just everything we need to keep our mental stability upright in these trying COVID 2020 times. So as always, Lachlan Irvine, where can they find you?
You can find me at Lock in the Crease on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, as well as on my blog, lockinthecrease.com, where I put out the North Division Power Rankings every single Sunday. And I am trying to churn out as much content as I possibly can. I am still behind on my personal goals of how much I'd like to be putting out there, but we're working on that. We're working on that in exchange for a lack of sleep. Yeah. Cody, where can they find you?
The fine folks listening to the CreaseCast can find me at Cody Sievertson on Twitter or on cometsharvest.com, where I've been churning out game recaps for the Utica Comets. Think tomorrow I will be reviewing, Syracuse, the rematch. That's the team they fought during the exhibition game. It should be fun because they had a really spirited event in their first game. And then Thursday, it'll be a rematch with Rochester, another spirited match. So this should be good. Anyways, we appreciate you guys tuning in. Thanks for following and thanks for listening. Recommend us to all your parents and all your friends. We appreciate the support. As always, folks, we'll talk to you guys later. Bye.
Bye.